Hey everybody, welcome to DadsDen and Pop Culture and a retrospective video today where we're gonna plow through a genre of comics that used to once be huge and has dwindled down to almost nothing. And here what I'm talking about is teen humor comics, as typified by Archie. Now Archie built an empire for itself, but there were tons of imitators along the way trying to cash in, get a piece of that pie. And we're going to go through that whole history. We're going to go through a lot of the Archie imitators, both in teen humor, also the kind of related working girl humor genres. And we'll talk a little bit about the rise and the fall. So let's get into it. In 1939, Maurice Coyne, Louis Silberkleit, and John L. Goldwater pooled their money and their initials and created MLJ Magazines Incorporated. Now, they initially did superhero stuff to sort of ride on the Superman wave. Blue Ribbon Comics, Pep Comics that starred the Shield, the first patriotic hero, beat Captain America to the punch, Top Notch Comics. But in 1941, Goldwater was inspired by an Andy Hardy movie, that all-American freckle-faced kid, and created the idea of Archie Andrews. Artist Bob Montana and writer Vic Bloom brought him to life, along with sweet girl next door Betty Cooper and best pal Jughead Jones, all three debuting in Pep Comics number 22 with a cover date of December of 1941, a month that would live in infamy. It was just a backup story in an otherwise action-heavy comic book, and it actually replaced a character called Madam Satan, of all things. By winter of 1942, Archie had his own book, Archie Comics, and by 1946, MLJ changed its name to Archie Comics Publications. A syndicated newspaper strip by Bob Montana also appeared in 1946. Archie was here to stay, and he should, in my opinion, be regarded as important a character as Superman or Batman when it comes to comic book history. The cast was expanded in April of 1942 with the introduction of spoiled rich brunette Veronica Lodge in Pep Comics number 26, thus introducing the eternal love triangle of Riverdale. And in the spring of 1942, Reggie Mantle showed up to cause Archie trouble in Jackpot Comics number 5 and number 6. Archie comics were essentially sitcoms sprinkled with romance, with a lot of good girl art, a lot of slapstick, a lot of puns. Now, sitcoms were nothing new in 1941. There was already the Andy Hardy series of films, of course, and the Blondie series, which were essentially 60-minute TV sitcoms. On the radio, you had the Aldrich family, Fibber, McGee, and Molly, the Great Gildersleeve. It goes on and on. Archie Comics essentially took the sitcom premise, adopting a short story format, lots of gags, which would probably be referred to nowadays as dad jokes, plus physical humor that is only possible in cartooning. The creative team was key to the success. Bob Montana created the original look for the comic, bouncy, round-faced cartoon energy with expressive body language. Vic Bloom's scripts created the premise, added all those jokes. In the late 1940s, Harry Lucey entered the art picture with crisper lines, better anatomy, and poised glamour on the girls. Bill Vigoda made his mark as well, although Montana and Lucey did dominate the art. Well, of course, Archie wasn't MLJ's first teenage character. In Zip Comics number 18 from September of 1941, a very similar character named Wilbur was introduced. More on him later. And before Archie and Wilbur were even sparkles in their creator's eyes, the newspaper strip Herald Teen premiered in 1919. It was created by Carl Eade, initially Sunday strip in the Chicago Tribune called The Love Life of Herald Teen. Later, it became a daily strip. The strip ended in 1959 with Carl's passing. It was a major hit. 60 newspapers carried it. There was merchandising and movies in 1928 and 1934. Now, the strip is all about the life of Harold Simpson, an awkward high schooler, his steady sweetheart, Lilliams Lovewell, his wisecracking sidekick, Alex Smart, and Pop Jinks, the gruff owner of the Sugar Bowl. Sound a little familiar there? The strip was on the cutting edge of the teenager phenomenon, when teens started to become a recognized demographic and therefore a group that you could market to. Now, high schools might have been the catalyst for this. Enrollment increased from about 30% in 1920 to over 60% of kids in 1936. It brought kids together away from family and away from mixed-aged workplaces. Post-World War II prosperity intensified the growth of a youth subculture, with kids having more disposable income to spend on clothes, records, and comic books. And the kids did spend. Archie was moving 3.5 to 3.8 million comics during each bi-monthly reporting period. The success of Archie Andrews, of course, prompted other publishers to launch their own teen humor titles, hoping to capture a share of the market. Now, these Archie clones proliferated in the mid to late 1940s, primarily from DC Comics, which would have been national at the time, and Timely, Atlas/Marvel Comics. Now, while none achieved Archie's cultural longevity, several enjoyed respectable runs and helped establish teen humor as a viable comic book genre. These books not only copied the general sitcom feel of Archie comics, they also tried to capture a similar look, and very often a very similar trade dress. So let's roll through some of these books. We're going to do this in chronological order, more or less, starting in the 1940s with Buzzy from DC Comics, premiered in All Funny Comics #1, winter of 1943, got his own book with Buzzy #1 in the winter of 1944. Buzzy ran for about 77 issues, ending in October of 1958. It was created by writer Alvin Schwartz, who was also the creator of Bizarro, and artist George Storm, a newspaper strip veteran behind a strip called Bobby Thatcher. Stories revolved around Buzzy Brown, a trumpet-playing Hellcat teen in the town of Cupcake Center. Now, Buzzy is accompanied by his best friend Bink on saxophone, girlfriend Susie Gruff, rival Wolfert the Wolf, and his broken-down Jalopy. The early stories emphasized musical hijinks, jitterbugs, and eccentric teen antics, with a slightly edgier swing-era flavor than Archie had. Now, over time, it shifted more towards standard Archie-style dating dilemmas, school pranks, family misunderstandings, that kind of thing. Buzzy was DC's first dedicated teen humor title. As the music theme faded to become more Archie-like, the covers also adopted a similar visual style. Now, also appearing in 1943 was Penny by Harry Henningsen. He had a comic strip called Our Bill about a teenage boy that ran in the 1930s, and then Penny, which ran until the 1970s. Penny was everything you'd expect: sock hops, malt shops, boy trouble. Henningsen had a really nice, clean, modern style to his art, though it wasn't really the good girl art that we would see in a lot of these kind of teen humor titles. Now, closely related to the teen humor genre, like I said, is the working girl humor genre, which also dates back to newspaper strips like Tilly the Toiler. Probably inspired by that strip is Tessie the Typist, first published by Timely Comics in April of 1944, ran for 23 issues, and then turned into Tiny Tessie. Tessie is a ditzy blonde secretary, another popular trope of the olden days, who brings the same kind of stories that happen in Riverdale High into the workplace. She would eventually be outdone by a sister book, which we will talk about in just a moment. Patsy Walker from Timely Comics debuted as a backup in Miss America Magazine #2 in November of 1944, and got a solo series in June of 1945 with Patsy Walker #1. Now, Patsy Walker ran over 100 issues into the 1960s. She was created by writer Stuart Little and artist Ruth Atkinson, with later heavy involvement by Stan Lee and Al Hartley. Atkinson also helped create another very important character for Timely. Again, more on her later. She left the comic book industry in 1952 to focus on fine art. Patsy Walker is this perky, red-headed high schooler in Centerville with her boyfriend Buzz Baxter, stylish rival and eventual friend Hetty Wolf, and supportive parents. Featured lighthearted high school romance, fashion-focused humor, dating rivalry, school pranks, aspirational career girl elements. It was all there. Now, Patsy was Timely's strongest rival to Archie and helped launch their entire line of teen titles. The character later evolved into the superhero Hellcat and married the actual son of Satan. Little and Atkinson probably did not see that one coming. Georgie Comics, starring a lovable girl crazy klutz who turned everyday high school life into a big slapstick disaster, launched with issue number 1 in January 1945 under Timely Comics. It ran 39 issues until 1952 and was briefly renamed Georgie and Judy Comics. Artists included house talents like Mike Sekowsky, Al Avison, and others. Stan Lee, of course, had a hand in editing and writing plenty of this era of teen humor at Timely. At the center of it was Georgie, the classic all-American teen goof, his best pal Monty, the scheming sidekick, and later a steady gal named Judy. Stories followed the Archie pattern of teenage hijinks. One early story had Georgie and Monty visiting the Timely offices to meet Captain Goodman, publisher Martin Goodman himself, who helped with a Hedy Lamarr crush scheme. The book was part of a shared universe with Patsy Walker, Frankie, and other Timely characters. A more important book for Timely, and I said I was going to bring her up in a little bit, Millie, the model, issue 1, debuted in August of 1945. It was Timely/Atlas/Marvel's longest-running humor title, spinning off books like A Date with Millie and Mad About Millie. Millie is perky and fashionable and always turning photo shoots and dates into delightful disasters. Slightly different from Archie and the teen set because it was about career gals. The book ran 207 issues through December of 1973, outlasting almost every other title in the humor genre outside of Archie publications. Early issues had a slightly more serious tone before shifting to light comedy. Ruth Atkinson created her and wrote and drew the first issue. Ken Bald then took over the book, and later Dan DeCarlo had a long, influential run. His clean, curvy lines defined the look of the book for the remainder of its run. And of course, once he jumped ship to Archie Comics, he brought his style with him, which became the Archie house style as well. When I first saw some of these, I thought, oh wow, they just totally ripped off the Archie style. No, in fact, they had it first. Stan Lee scripted tons of Millie stories. He loved writing humor, and Stan Goldberg handled later art and covers. Now, Millicent Millie Collins was a sweet, ambitious blonde from Sleepy Gap, Kansas, trying to make it big in New York City as a top model for the Hanover agency. Her photographer boyfriend, Clicker Holbrook, snaps pics and gets jealous, while fiery redhead rival Chilly Storm schemes to steal jobs, boyfriends, and the spotlight. Other characters include best pal Tony Turner, wardrobe gal Daisy with her Jughead-like boyfriend Marvin, and boss Mr. Hanover. Millie crossed over lightly in the Marvel Universe at the Fantastic Four's wedding and as an agency owner in a couple Dazzler comic issues. The same time Timely was introducing Millie the model, they were also introducing Nellie the Nurse. Both of these titles are part of the working girl humor genre, like I mentioned. Nellie the Nurse #1 had a cover date of August of 1945. The book ran with a slight title change for 36 issues until 1952. Nellie, America's red-headed riot, sorry Lucey, she beat you to it, is a perky nurse who deals with crushes on doctors, medical slapstick, and dating antics, basically exchanging the high school of Archie Comics for a hospital, which is probably not a good thing, actually. Susie was a minor title from Archie Comics that appeared in 1945. She's a bubbly blonde with her own romantic triangle and plenty of slapstick comedy. Susie didn't last too long, but it was a really well-drawn comic book by Sam Schwartz, Bill Vigoda, and others. She also appeared in issues of Laugh Comics. Willie Comics starred a lovable girl-chasing goofball in the Archie vein. It launched with issue #1 in fall of 1946 under Timely Comics and ran through issue number 23 in 1950. It started as a continuation from Ideal Comics and later morphed briefly into Lil Willie before switching back to Willie Comics and eventually becoming Crime Cases Comics. Stanley, of course, was involved with writing and editing. The stories are, kiddie-level antics early on, but they moved towards teen dating stories over time. Backups often included features like Hank and Lank. Now, Torchy, on the other hand, was not really a kiddie comic, even though she was probably being read by kids. She got a solo series in November of 1949, but actually originated by Bill Ward as a comic strip for GIs during World War II. Now, Bill Ward was another major pinup good girl artist who, like Dan DeCarlo, did some very risque comic work that appeared in men's magazines of the days. She was also a backup character in Dollman and Modern Comics alongside Blackhawk. Torchy probably wouldn't have survived the Comics Code Authority, but you can see the relationship to the good girl art, and therefore to the teen humor books of the day. Now, Margie Comics started with issue number 35 in winter of 1946 after beginning life as Comedy Comics. It ran through issue 49 to December of 1949, just 15 issues from Timely Comics. It continued on later as Reno Brown. Now, Morris Weiss's bouncy style made Margie a standout in the good girl art crowd. Margie, really Margaret Murphy, is an all-American teen girl, perky boy crazy, always in some sort of trouble. In issue 46, she had an imaginary date with none other than a young Stan Lee himself, his earliest comic appearance as a character. She shared the Timely universe with Willie, Rusty, Patsy Walker, and others. So yeah, she is part of the Marvel universe. Frankie Comics kicked off with issue number 4 in winter of 46, continuing from Movie Tunes Comics under Timely. It ran through issue number 11 in December of 1948, then morphed into Frankie and Atlanta Comics from number 12 to number 15 before becoming Frankie Fuddle. Frankie was America's scream boy, a loud, energetic, all-American klutz. Frankie shared the Timely universe with crossovers and backups from the rest of the humor line, but perhaps not as coherently as with the Archie Riverdale crew. And I think that's one of the things that really helped Archie out, was everything sort of blended together really nicely in Riverdale. All Teen Comics / Teen Comics from Timely started with issue number 20 in January of 1947 as a retitle of the superhero anthology All Winners Comics. It was changed simply to Teen Comics with the next issue in April of 1947. The book featured Patsy Walker prominently, along with other Timely teens like Georgie and Willie. Now, as with Pep Comics, this was a superhero book that turned into a teen comedy book to take advantage of a tremendous demand for those kinds of stories. Patsy carried the title and became, again, Timely's flagship teen star. It continued through issue 35, May of 1950, before morphing into Journey into Unknown Worlds. Timely was nothing if not flexible with their titles. Oscar Comics launched with issue number 24 in spring of 1947. And you notice a lot of these, they're starting out as something else. They are turning into teen humor. That tells you it was a very popular genre at the time. It picked up its numbering from Funny Tunes under Timely Comics. A lot of Timely Comics in here. They really hit the humor stuff hard. It ran for 10 issues in 1949 before turning briefly into Awful Oscar for 2 issues, and then reverting back to Oscar Comics for a couple more. Not the most subtle cover here, but then subtlety didn't sell books. Now, Oscar Comics was an anthology, so there was no single breakout star like Patsy, but it featured recurring teen humor strips with the usual archetypes and plots. Margie showed up here, as did Rusty and other Timely characters. Some issues had backup goodies like Hey Look gags by Harvey Kurtzman, who would, of course, go on to become a legend at Mad Magazine. Rusty Comics ran from April of 47 to July of 49 as a retitle of Kid Movie Comics by Timely. Now, Rusty is a kid, later becomes a teen. He's a mischief maker with Blondie-style domestic comedy that later, like I said, got into dating and other teenager stuff. Stan Lee did the scripting with artists like Al Jaffe and Harvey Kurtzman, who apparently hated it, doing the art chores. So a lot of the Mad Magazine guys, this is where they're working before they went into Mad Magazine. Genie Comics started as All Surprise Comics for 12 issues, then was renamed and refocused in April of 1947. Later, it turned into Cowgirl Romances. Al Jaffe on this one, and Valerie Barclay. She handled stories and pencils on many issues. Genie, Queen of the Teens, was a cute brunette, sometimes blonde on the covers, your basic high school dream girl. Plots were in the Archie vein, and pals like Willie and Margie popped in for crossovers now and then. The character debuted in backups in Willie Comics and Georgie Comics before earning her own title. Hijinks was an oddball from American Comics Group, basically a hybrid of funny animals and teen humor. First issue came out in July of 1947. It only ran for 7 issues, ending in July of 1948. Art was by Jack Bradbury in the first issue, and it's pretty good. It's more funny animal than teen humor, really. Kind of has the feel of a hip Looney Tune cartoon. Ultimately, though, it's more than a curiosity than anything else, but the art really caught my eye, and I am planning on reading some more of those. Junior Comics was a product of Fox Feature Syndicate, showing up in September of 1947, and so help me, it almost looks like an underground version of Archie, and with good reason. The book was brought to us by Al Feldstein, the guy who later ran EC Comics and made Mad Magazine legendary. and who probably helped the Comics Code Authority come into being, though he wasn't really trying to do that. Junior Hancock is your typical girl-crazy teenage boy. There's a definite emphasis on the good girl art angle here, with a couple panels that actually surprised me for the time period and the subject matter. Issue number 12 does the famous Marilyn Monroe bit before Marilyn got there. Now, Junior had a companion in the form of Sunny, which basically flipped the formula and had a boy-crazy girl getting into trouble chasing guys. The books crossed over from time to time. Now, look at that cover and tell me that Feldstein wasn't skating on thin ice here. Junior only got 8 issues from number 9 to number 16. Cindy Comics launched with issue number 27 in the fall of 1947. After beginning its run as Crazy Comics from Timely, ran through issue 38 in 1950 before being retitled to Cindy Smith for 2 issues, and then turned into Crime Can't Win. Now, Cindy Smith is a smart, resourceful blonde high schooler in Oakdale. Her steady love interest is Chuck Rivers, and she has rivals like the scheming Sandra Lake, a Veronica Lake-inspired dark-haired beauty who loved to stir up trouble, and she has a gal pal named Goldie Adams. Stories are pretty much what you would expect, but Cindy was a little more clever and take charge than some of the other gals in the genre. The character debuted in Junior Miss number 24 before getting her solo title. She had crossovers with the rest of Timely's humor line. So again, they were definitely aiming for what Archie did with Riverdale. I don't know that they quite got it because they didn't have a centralized town where all these characters could live and interact with one another. A Date with Judy, number 1 from DC Comics, we'll just say DC instead of National, premiered in October of 1947. Judy was handled by Henry Boltinoff, Stan Kay, Graham Place, and others, and was based on the radio program created by Aline Leslie. It's all about Judy Foster, a perky boy-crazy, all-American teenager. Going to say perky, I'm going to say all-American a lot in this video. Her steady boyfriend, Oogie Pringle, long-suffering parents, especially her dad, Melvin, with later additions like Beatnik Nervous, and it followed the standard Archie comedy style. Now, this is, like I said, a direct tie-in to a long-running radio show, went from 1941 to 1950, and there was a 1948 MGM film starring Jane Powell and Elizabeth Taylor. Fashion advice pages were a regular feature in the comic. Now, the series actually outlasted its radio counterpart, running 79 issues until October of 1960. Junie Prom Comics was a short-lived effort from Deerfield Publishing. Everybody was getting into the act. It ran for 7 issues from December of 1947 to 1949. Original copies are hard to come by because it had a very limited distribution. Junie had backups like Dexter, Not the Serial Killer, and Debbie Dale, as well as fashion tips. Now, with the boom in these humor strips, everything old was new again. In February of 1948, St. John Publishing began publishing the comic strip Mopsy in comic book form. The character had premiered about 10 years earlier, and she's sort of in the career gal humor style. Now, Mopsy was created and drawn by Gladys Parker, a very cool lady who went on to primarily work in fashion. Mopsy was more, like I said, working girl humor, an independent lady, always très chic, with one-liners about men, fashion, and everyday life. At its peak, Mopsy was in over 300 papers, and honestly, it is a gorgeous comic strip. The comic book ran 19 issues from 1948 to 1953. All Humor Comics launched in 1946 as a humor anthology. In 1948, in issue number 11, it introduced Pinky. Now, Pinky Parker was a ditzy blonde drawn by Janice Valo, who contributed to many quality comics titles, but they were also quality titles. Pinky had a boyfriend named Herbie, a neighbor named Marge, and she worked for fussy Mr. Gretzel. My Date Comics is a really interesting one, a hybrid teen humor romance comic. This one only managed 4 issues from July of 47 to January 48. Contributors included Jack King Kirby and Joe Simon, the creators of both Captain America and romance comics. It sounds a lot like Love American Style in comic book form. Mitzi Comics number 1 was published by Timely in spring of 1948. It was renamed Mitzi's Boyfriend for issues 2 through 7, and then became Mitzi's Romances for issues 8 to 10. So a total of 10 issues across the name changes, a short run, like a whirlwind summer romance, Again, it was part of Timely's big Archie chasing teen push. Later issues featured Ken Bald art, who also worked on Millie and Cindy, and Stan Lee scripted some of the Romances era. At center stage was Mitzi Martin, a perky, all-American girl. Mitzi's Romances leaned a bit into the boyfriend romance angle, but it stayed wholesome. She first popped up in All Teen Comics number 20 before getting her own book. Leave It to Binky from DC Comics started in March of 1948. Binky was created by Hal Seeger and Bob Oksner, hallowed be his name. It ran from 60 issues through October of 1958, and then would be revived later in the 1960s. Classic teen comedy comic, it starred Bertram Binky Biggs, his girlfriend Peggy Baxter, rival Sherwood, dog Dopey, and of course his long-suffering parents. Now it's interesting to me how parents in these things are usually not depicted as the bad guys, except maybe for Mr. Lodge and his desire to get Archie out of Veronica's life. Can't necessarily blame him. But mostly they're the good-hearted victims of teenage antics. You can tell these books were not written by teenagers, but rather by people closer to the parents. Binky was one of DC's longest-running original teen characters of the era. Bob Oksner's glamorous yet wholesome art on the girls became a hallmark. Meet Corliss Archer was a Fox Feature Syndicate book that got started in March of 1948. It was based on the radio show of the same name, only ran for 3 issues. Al Feldstein was the star contributor, scripts, art, covers. His eye-catching art in particular was mentioned in Wortham's Seduction of the Innocents, so you know. Lana was a Timely magazine, first published in May of 1948. It fits into the working girl genre of these kind of books. Character got her start as a backup in Annie Oakley, number 2. It concerns the adventures of Lana Lane, a would-be actress who lives at Mother Murphy's boarding house. Her roommate is Eve Noble. Her rival, there's always a rival, is Clara Bright, and she has a booking agent named Speedy Swift. Lana crossed over into other Timely mags of the day, Russie, Tessie, The Typist, Gay Comics, anyways, Hetty Divine, Nellie the Nurse, etc. Dan DeCarlo did some of the interior art, and that cover there is by Bill Everett. It managed 7 issues before turning into Little Lana, basically a clone of comics like Little Dot or Little Lulu. Now, Scribbly was a semi-autobiographical comic about a boy cartoonist with a unique meta self-deprecating angle. Scribbly first popped up as a backup feature in Dell's Popular Comics and the Funnies, and then moved over to All-American Comics, one of DC's precursors, in 1939. His solo title, launched as Scribbly number 1 in August of 1948 under DC, ran for 15 issues until about 1952. Now, Scribbly was created, written, and drawn by the great Sheldon Mayer, the same fellow behind Sugar and Spike and a lot of DC humor titles. Early stories were gag-heavy, later ones leaned more into teen romance hijinks with that Archie flavor. Scribbly Gibbet was a freckle-faced teen cartoonist, a stand-in for Sheldon Mayer, forever trying to sell comic strips while landing in one mess after another. His long-suffering mom, Mrs. Gibbet, bratty little sister Snoony, and pals like neighborhood grocer Ma Hunkle, who would almost join the Justice Society of America as the original Red Tornado, rounded things out. He had a later cameo in Sugar and Spike number 30. Now this one straddles the line between teen humor and really almost more adult humor. I mean, not that kind of adult humor, and superhero stuff. Though it leaned more towards the humor side, this was Timely Comics' Venus. First issue came out in August of 1948 and concerns the actual Venus, goddess of love, who lives on the planet Venus, and she comes to Earth. She winds up becoming a writer for a magazine, falling in love with the publisher, and gaining a rival at the magazine named Hetty Divine. So there was a humor angle, a good girl art, a semi-love triangle, though I think Hetty wanted the job really more than the man, and really excellent art from Lynn Streeter, written by Stan Lee. After a few issues, Venus got sort of weird. It sort of turned into sci-fi and then horror, and then it went away. Now, by the early 1950s, Archie Andrews had firmly established himself as the flagship character of what was now Archie Comics Publications. The superhero titles that launched MLJ in 1939 had been almost entirely phased out, with the company fully embracing teen humor as its core identity. The 1950s were the golden era of Riverdale. They were refining the concept, refining the art, expanding the cast and launching spin-off titles that kept Archie really the big dog in teen humor. Dan DeCarlo emerged as the defining artistic voice of the decade for Archie Comics, joining the team around 1957-1958 after a successful run on Marvel's Millie the Model. DeCarlo streamlined the characters, slimmer, more dynamic figures, cleaner lines, and he added contemporary fashion details inspired by his wife's fashion magazines. Bob Montana continued the syndicated newspaper strip, and Harry Lucey provided polished interior work. Lucey was a absolute master of cartoony slapstick figure work, really excels at it. Writers such as Frank Doyle, George Glader, and others supplied witty, formula-perfect scripts. Editor Harry Shorten oversaw the line. Reggie Mantle was fully integrated as Archie's primary rival in the 1950s, supporting players such as Mr. Weatherby, Miss Grundy, Moose Mason, Midge Clump, and others received more consistent roles in the series. The love triangle between Archie, Betty, and Veronica drove most of the stories. Archie comic stories remained wholesome, even with Dan DeCarlo's figure work, which, like I said, oftentimes appeared in men's magazines of the day. Now, the Comics Code Authority was introduced in 1954, and though it had little impact on Archie Comics at the time, it might have contributed to long-term problems for the line a couple decades later, and we'll get to that later. Spin-off titles in this decade included Archie's Girls, Betty and Veronica, Katie Keene, a glamorous fashion-focused series created by Bill Wogan, kind of a rival to Timely's Millie the Model, a revival of Wilbur Comics, Archie's teen rival, Archie's Pals and Gals, and Life with Archie in 1958, which introduced longer adventure-oriented stories. By the end of the 1950s, Archie Comics had become the established leader in teen humor genre. The wholesome high school soap opera had created a self-sustaining empire built on one red-headed boy's eternal romantic dilemmas. And sales were still strong in the 1950s, with the core title selling about 400,000 to 500,000 copies per month, about the same as DC's Batman. So powerful were Archie Comics that they got a send-up in Mad number 12, one that reminds you why the Comic Code Authority eventually showed up, and how much some of those Mad magazine writers and artists hated working on the Archie clones back in the 1940s. Now, of course, there were a whole lot of Archie clones and rivals in the 1950s, just like in the 40s. A few fewer than the 40s, I'll admit. Henry Aldrich came from a very popular radio sitcom and made the leap to comic books in April of 1950. Published by Dell, the kings of licensing, it ran for 22 issues until 1954. The radio show, The Aldrich Family, premiered in 1939. And if you've ever heard a woman yelling, Henry Aldrich, followed by a coming mother in an old Looney Tune, you've sort of heard of the radio show. Henry was probably an influence on the Archie character, though he couldn't manage to outdo Archie in the comics. He was a bumbling teenage boy with a best pal named Homer Brown, living in small-town America. Very wholesome stuff. Covers were mostly done by Bill Williams, with interiors by John Stanley and Gaylord Dubois. Williams, by the way, started as a Disney animator. He worked on Fantasia and Dumbo, flew fighters in World War II, and only then did he enter the world of comic books. Maisie got rolling in 1950 from Nationwide Publishing, with David Gantz handling covers and interiors on the initial run. In 1955, the title moved to Harvey Comics. Now, Gantz got his start with Timely, thanks to the great Al Jaffe. He mostly worked on funny animal stuff before getting into humor, horror, westerns, etc. From 1950 to 59, he assisted Charles Schultz on Peanuts. He'd eventually focused on comic strips and children's books. Maisie is a really beautiful book, fantastic art, clean lines. Like so many of these books, it wandered into territory we would later associate with teen magazines like Tiger Beat, with columns on TV shows and movies, gossip on actors and actresses, that kind of thing. Now, and like many of these, you also got the pinups and paper dolls. America once had a thriving paper doll industry that has now largely gone the way of the village smithy. Patsy and Hetty was a Patsy Walker spinoff, launched in 1952 from Timely Comics, ran a very solid 110 issues, finally folding in 1967. Early covers and art were by Al Hartley. Stan Lee was writer-editor, and talents such as Al Jaffe pitched in on later issues. In 1965, Patsy and Hetty had a crossover with the Marvel Universe in Fantastic Four Annual Number 3, showing up in Reed and Sue's wedding audience. I think it's really worth noting that Timely Atlas Marvel competed more effectively with Archie comics than almost anyone else, especially with Patsy Walker and Millie the Model. Much of that success is probably due to Stan Lee. In April of 1952, Dell brought Andy Hardy, the guy who chiefly inspired Archie, into comic books in their 4-color series. He ran for 4 issues and then shifted to his own title for a couple more, his run ending in 1954. Al Hubbard worked on the series, and Dan DeCarlo contributed to Andy Hardy number 6. National Periodical Publications launched Here's Howie, number 1, in May of 1952. It ran a solid 18 issues through about 1954 as a bi-monthly title. The character, Howie Howe, actually debuted earlier in half-page and one-page gags across other DC titles as far back as 1949. Owen Fitzgerald handled plenty of the pencils and covers, with scripts keeping everything light and snappy. Howie Howe was the classic teen klutz. Early issues had him in high school, but in issue number 5, he enlists in the Army, adding some military uniform-themed humor. By 1952, the teen humor lineup was extensive enough to see some more off-the-wall entries. Jetta, teenage sweetheart of the 21st century, was one of the more interesting ones. Teen humor in the far future year of 2052. The book got started in December of 1952, ran for a big 3 issues. It was created and drawn by Dan DeCarlo with scripts by Joe Archibald. Some freaking amazing art in this thing. I got to tell you something. Jetta Ray was a perky redhead who lived in a world of flying cars, robots, jetpacks. She attends Neutron High School and has the typical teen humor cast of characters and all the stuff you would expect. And if this thing didn't inspire the Jetsons, I would be really, really surprised. Now, Ginger was an Archie product, a blonde with Betty Cooper-like sweetness and her own brunette rival. It lasted for 10 issues and has mostly been forgotten in the Archie universe. Now, Ginger has that amazing house style of Archie comics at the time. The art is really lovely. Cartoony, clean lines, great facial expressions, excellent cartoon motion. Plots are what you would expect. High school sitcoms, puns, pratfalls, a cast of characters that looks like a parallel dimension version of the population of Riverdale. Still, that Harry Lucey art, though, is just amazing. Ginger Snap is the central character. Icky is the nerd. Tommy, the love interest. And, of course, there's a brunette rival, Bunny. Now, look at those expressions. Lucey turned the DeCarlo style up a notch in terms of motion and expression. Now, Ginger had a backup called Glinda, who was really just an Archie clone. Again, all the publishers were testing the limits of this market, including Archie itself. Now, speaking of the success of Patsy Walker, yeah, she got another spinoff in May of 1953 with Patsy and her pals, another Stan Lee, Stan Goldberg joint production. This one only got 29 issues, running through August of 1957. June of 1953 brought Lucey, the Real Gone Gal, for just 4 issues from publisher St. John. She is a bubbly, wild-at-heart teen, lots of troublemaking, standard teen humor stuff. The strip has some really cool art from Lily Renee, Vince Fago, and Dave Berg, with Mort Drucker covers. Mort Drucker, of course, one of the all-time greats of Mad Magazine. Again, amazing how many Mad Maniacs worked in teen humor. Lucey had a couple cool backups. There was Rita, and there was Ginny, and Jelly Bean, as well as a couple others. Now, Alice's college girl, Wendy Parker, had a slightly more grown-up flavor than her high school rivals. Wendy Parker Comics launched in 1953, ran a short 8 issues through 1954 as a bi-monthly title. The art was mostly by Christopher Rule, with Morris Weiss contributing some stories and pencils. Wendy Parker is a college student at Tech University. Her supporting cast included roommates, professors, and rivals in light romantic triangles. Right there on the top, Patsy Walker in this issue. She really drove things for Timely Comics. Charlton Comics had a success with TV tie-in My Little Margie, first issue in July of 1954. It ran 54 issues until 1964, long outliving the show upon which it was based. Early issues had great art by Chick Stone, an Archie Comics regular, and Vic Donahue. It got a companion title, My Little Margie's Boyfriends, in 1955, that lasted for 11 issues. The art is really fantastic, especially if you're an Archie fan, so you might want to look into these books. 1959 brought another spinoff, My Little Margie's Fashions, which focused more on modeling and fashion. 2 attempted spinoffs, neither one stuck. Archie Comics made it look so easy, but it's also worth noting that TV and radio tie-in comics sometimes did well, but not as well as the actual Archie titles. Well, Everything Happens to Harvey was launched by National in September of 1953, ran only 7 issues. Bob Oksner handled some pencils and covers, with Henry Boltinoff scripting and Mort Drucker popping in once in a while. That first cover is essentially how the Trojan War got started. The main character was Harvey Payne, a classic schmuck. He lived with his dad, Chester, a real estate man who got dragged into his son's chaos, and he had love interest in Sue Carter and pals like Blink. Stories usually involved Harvey's best-laid plans blowing up in his face. Backups included features like Kobe, Willie, and Varsity Vic one-pagers by Boltinoff, which also appeared in the superhero books of the day. Now, Girl's Life was an Atlas comic that debuted in January of 1954, primarily as a vehicle for Patsy Walker. And in fact, she was the fictional editor of the magazine. It only ran for 6 issues. With the magazine, you got comics, but also fashion pages, beauty tips, advice columns, etc. Again, made it similar to the teen magazines, that were coming out, like 17, which got started in 1944, Teen in 1957, and Tiger Beat, which spun off in 1965. Linda, or Everybody Loves Linda, sorry, Raymond, was a comic published by Ajax Farrell starting in April of 1954, and running 4 issues to November of 1954. Linda was a good example of a book using Archie trade dress to sell their titles, although in this case not very successfully. Linda was joined in April 1954 by a really interesting addition to the working girl humor genre, Meet Miss Pepper. Now, this one is about a novice teacher, Van Halen would have loved her, dealing with students, parents, and her own love life. St. John was the Punisher. The creative folks behind it, Joe Kubert and Norman Maurer, Mo Howard's son-in-law. The art is fantastic. It is well worth looking into. Now, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen does not exactly fit into the Archie teen humor genre, but the book seems to me to have been inspired by Archie's success. Note the title. Very much like Archie's pal Jughead, young redheaded cub reporter Jimmy Olsen is Superman's pal, and he gets involved in wild schemes that sometimes involve girls like Lucy Lane, Lois's little sister. DC Comics launched the title in September of 1954, and it ran 163 issues until March of 1974, one of the longest-running Superman spin-offs, born from Jimmy's popularity in the Adventures of Superman TV show. Early art was usually by Kurt Swan. Jack Kirby took the reins for issues 133 to 148 in the early 70s, introducing some concepts that survive to this day in the DC universe. Writers included Otto Binder, Robert Bernstein, Leo Dorfman, and even Jerry Siegel. It eventually folded into the Superman family title. My Girl Pearl launched in April of 55 from Atlas Comics and ran 11 issues through 1961, started as a replacement for the licensed My Friend Irma series, and was more in the vein of the Millie comics. Dan DeCarlo and Stan Lee created Pearl, with DeCarlo on early pencils and covers, and then Stan Goldberg taking over later. Pearl Dimly was a sweet, scatterbrained blonde secretary who meant well but turned every day into a comedy of errors. This was an archetype you saw often in comedy back then, with Gracie Allen maybe being the best version of the character that there ever was. She lived with sensible brunette roommate Nan Smith and had a landlady named Mrs. Lumpkin, maybe Willie's mom. Her constant admirer was Junior Wardle, son of her boss, but she wanted cab driver Flash Grogan. Receptionist Daphne added the Veronica rivalry angle to the comic. A Date with Millie from Atlas started in 1956. It was primarily written by Stan Lee, with art and covers by Dan DeCarlo, later contributions from Stan Goldberg and Al Hartley. A spin-off of Millie the Model, it followed the same basic premise. The title morphed into Life with Millie after 7 issues and ran to issue number 20, and then changed to Modeling with Millie in 1963 and ran to issue number 54 in 1967. One late issue of this book had a story called Millie the Marvel that veered comically into superhero territory. A Date with Patsy from Atlas was a September 1957 one-shot spin-off of the successful Patsy Walker series. Artist Al Hartley later became a major contributor to Archie Comics. Now, we already mentioned Superman's pal, so we might as well talk about his girlfriend, Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane. Again, note the similarity to Archie's girls, Betty and Veronica. Gave the sassy Daredevil reporter her own book, and like Betty, she had a rival in Lana Lang, though Lois might be more the Veronica type when you get right down to it. The title launched in March of 58, kept going for 137 issues through 1974. Early art by Kurt Schaffenberger, with additional art by Kurt Swan and Ross Andrew. Writers included Otto Binder, Robert Bernstein, Leo Dorfman, and Jerry Siegel. The Lois Lane books have some of the best drawn covers of the Silver Age, period. The book was one of DC's top sellers in the early 60s. Early stories focused on the battle between Lois and Lana for Superman's heart and his hand in marriage. Later issues got a little bit edgier into social issues of the day. The title eventually folded into that Superman family title. Kathy was Atlas's Teenage Tornado. The title launched in October of 59, ran 27 issues through 1964. Stan Lee wrote most of the stories, with Stan Goldberg handling the bulk of the art and covers. Kathy Carter was an all-American teenage girl. She lived with her folks in a typical small-town setup, had a steady named Rick Brown, and a sharp-tongued best friend rival named Liz Hilton. Well, the 1960s saw Archie comic publications continue to dominate in the teen humor genre while adapting to broader industry trends. The core titles remained the financial backbone, but the company ventured into new creative territory. The groovy 60s spirit infused the line with contemporary fashion, slang, and pop culture nods without abandoning its wholesome foundation. Dan DeCarlo solidified his role as the artistic cornerstone of the Archie universe. The Riverdale ensemble continued to grow and evolve. Established characters received deeper personalities and more frequent spotlight stories. New additions included Josie McCoy and her friends, who evolved into a rock band, tapping into the burgeoning youth music scene. Besides She's Josie, they also added Archie and Me, Archie's TV Laugh Out, which introduced Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and Everything's Archie. Archie stories experimented with Archie as the superhero Pureheart the Powerful, and the spy parody The Man from Riverdale. Archie hummed along, selling 450 to 500,000 copies per month through most of the 1960s, probably peaking at about 566,000 in 1968, thanks to the Filmation cartoon and the hit song Sugar Sugar. Batman started the decade strong as well at about 500,000 comics, dipped a bit, and then exploded to almost 900,000 copies a month in 1966 when the Adam West Show hit. The Caped Crusaders stayed strong at about 800,000 in 1967 before settling to about 400,000 or 350 or so by 1969. So Batman hit higher, but Archie was more consistent. Now, unfortunately, the good times weren't going to keep rolling in Riverdale forever. TV would prove to be part of the problem. The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis was DC's tie-in comic to the TV show. It launched in June of 1960 and ran 26 issues through 1964. Now, given how the Archie cartoon show helped the Archie comics, you would think that other TV tie-in comics would have done better. Now, it was based again directly on CBS's series that itself came from the short stories of Max Schulman. Art was mostly by the great Bob Oksner, with writing bouncing around. Arnold Drake handled some later issues. After the license ended, DC repurposed some of the stories into a short Wendy and Willie series that debuted in 1969. Tippy Teen, America's teenage sweetheart, was one of the more successful Archie rivals of the 1960s. Tower Comics, best known for the Thunder Agents, launched Tippy Teen in November of 1965. It ran for 25 issues, plus an unnumbered special collector's edition through October of 1969. Unfortunately, Tower only lasted about as long as Tippy did. They reprinted some of the stories under Atlas Comics in the 1970s, retitled as Vicky. It was created and edited by Sam Schwartz, Archie veteran famous for making Jughead, the man we all know and love, with heavy moonlighting from Dan DeCarlo, Harry Lucey, Bill Williams, Doug Crane, and others. Tippy was extremely well drawn, fun stories, but not terribly different from Archie. In fact, very few of the rivals were particularly different from Archie, and that's probably something that contributed to the loss of audience that was on the way. The magazine also featured puzzle pages, profiles of actors and musicians, lots of teen magazine stuff. Tippy Teen herself is a bubbly blonde with a knack for wacky schemes. Her clumsy red-headed steady is Tommy Trippett, her best friend Go-Go West, a cynical, snarky brunette. Go-Go's boyfriend is the big jock called Animal, sort of a Midge Moose thing going on there. Peggy Flegel was Tippy's snobby rival. Her gang also included nerdy Egghead Eggers and bully Ashley Hartburn. Now, later issues got a tad more saucy with bikini covers as sales dipped, but the book stayed mostly wholesome. Swing with Scooter was another DC Comics shot at Archie-style hijinks. First issue was cover dated July of 1966. It was created by writers Barbara Friedlander and Jack Miller, with art by Joe Orlando early on, later contributions from Henry Scarpelli. The series ran for 36 issues, ending in 1972. The main character is Scooter, a stylish British mod teenage musician who leaves his band, the Banshees, and relocates to small-town USA. Supporting cast included girlfriend Cookie, plus pals Kenny, Malibu, and Penny. The comic was obviously inspired by the British invasion, and culture clashes between the Brit and his new American surroundings were a part of the stories. There were occasional celebrity or superhero crossovers as well, with Batman, Superman, and the Justice League all showing up. Now, Bunny was published by Harvey Comics starting in 1966, ran about 25 issues into the early 70s. It was a rare foray into teen humor by Harvey, who were best known for Casper and Richie Rich. Apparently, the dialogue was a good example of Bob Hope in a hippie wig. Strictly Squaresville, it is kind of famous for just really not getting the teen thing in the 1960s. Tower Comics' aforementioned Tippy Teen got 2 spin-offs during its relatively short life. Tippy's Friends Go-Go and Animal was published in August of 1966 and ran 15 issues through 1969 as a bi-monthly magazine. It had the same creatives, and vibe as Tippy Teen, though with a spotlight on Go-Go West and her steady beau, Animal. They hung with the full Centerville crew. It was joined by Teen in 1968, which mixed comic stories with, again, the kind of teen magazine features on celebrities, movie, music news, and fashion. Only 4 issues, but they're worth checking out as a time capsule of the late 1960s, and the art is absolutely fantastic. Well, DC's Binky got a revival in the 1960s following the youthquake in entertainment. It started in Showcase number 70 in September of 1967, then shifted to a revived Leave It to Binky number 61 in July of 68, later shortened to Binky, ran all the way to 1977, DC's most successful teen book for sure. Bob Oksner handled most of the art for the series. Henry Scarpelli later joined him and won a Shazam Award for his inking. The book would get a spin-off title. DC Comics used to have a theory that gorillas on comic covers sold books. That might have not been true with Angel and the Ape. It was a Silver Age swing, a detective comedy with a gorgeous gal and her big brainy gorilla partner. The duo got their start in Showcase number 77 in 1968, soon graduated to their own magazine, which ran for 7 issues until December of 1969. The final issue was renamed Meet Angel, as they tried to tweak the formula. It was created by E. Nelson Bridwell and Bob Oksner, with ink sometimes provided by the great Wally Wood. There was a 4-issue revival miniseries by Phil Folio in 1991 and a later revival in the New 52 era. Angel O'Day is a stunning, scatterbrained, model-turned-private eye with legs for days who teams up with Sam Simeon, a talking gorilla who's secretly a comic book artist. He's the muscle and also the one who solves most of the mysteries. A Date with Debbie was another DC attempt at the genre, starting in January of 69 and running for 18 issues through November of 1972. A spin-off, Debbie's Dates, got started in April of 69, ran 11 issues. Both series had covers by Sam Schwartz and Gaspar Saladino, and art from Henry Scarpelli, Doug Crane, Bob Oksner, and others. Henry Boltinoff, John Albano, and Barbara Friedlander provided the scripts. Debbie Anderson was the star of this one, the typical teen dream girl who lived with her folks and her kid, pesky brother, Rockwell Rocky Anderson. Her often flustered boyfriend was Buddy Baxter, the boy next door. Rivals included Mona DeWolf. Sadly, neither title survived DC's axing of their humor line in 1972. Binky's Buddies, that spinoff I talked about earlier, premiered in February of 1969, created by Henry Scarpelli with help from Bob Oksner, writing from Sheldon Mayer, Henry Boltinoff, and others. It was a spinoff, like I say, from the long-running Leave It to Binky, with the same basic cast of characters. Slightly broader comedy in this one, more kid-friendly than the main Binky title. Unfortunately, it was all over for it after 12 issues. Mad About Millie launched in April of 69, a spin-off from the main Millie the Model title. It ran for 16 issues, closing up shop in 71. Stan Lee wrote most of the issues, with Stan Goldberg handling the art chores. Book followed the basic Millie formula, and it did get an annual in 1971. And like I mentioned earlier, Wendy and Willie was a short-lived book that dusted off the Dobie Gillis stories after that license was lost by DC. Essentially, it renamed the characters, put them in different clothes, launched in May of 69, got 4 issues. Its main claim to fame, really, really wonderful covers. Well, the 1970s represented a period of both consolidation and innovation for Archie Comics. With the core teen humor formula well established, the company focused on expanding accessibility through reprints and maintaining a steady stream of new material. Superhero experiments largely faded after the 60s, allowing the Riverdale cast to remain the undisputed heart of the company. The decade also saw the company adapt to changing market conditions, including rising costs, shifting reader habits. It introduced the digest formats that would prove highly successful for decades. Dan DeCarlo continued as the primary artistic force and house-style guardian. His clean, fashionable, and expressive approach kept the characters looking fresh and contemporary. He remained especially prominent on Betty and Veronica and Josie-related material and countless covers. Other veterans like Harry Lucey contributed reliably until health issues in the mid-1970s, after which Chick Stone stepped in as a key penciler and inker, maintaining that polished house look. The Riverdale ensemble saw modest but meaningful growth, adding a solo series for Sabrina the Teenage Witch and introducing supporting players such as Chuck Clayton, who was introduced in 1974, and Nancy Woods. And yes, that's the recent facsimile cover because that's the best copy of it I could find. Archie stories of the 1970s stayed true to the established formula, but also addressed the contemporary issues, the energy crisis, pollution, the generation gap. Spin-off titles included Archie at Riverdale High and the aforementioned Sabrina the Teenage Witch. More significantly was Archie's Comics Digest #1 from August of 1973. It launched the highly successful Digest line, reprinting classic stories in a compact, affordable format that introduced older material to younger readers and kind of kept the back issues alive. In fact, my first exposure to Archie was grabbing the Digest at the grocery store and discovering that I really, really liked them. The company also licensed the characters for Spire Christian Comics, i.e. Archie's Sunshine, producing wholesome moral tales. Now, despite these innovations, the teen humor genre and comics in general faced increasing competition from television, rising paper costs, and shifting youth interests in the 1970s. Archie started the decade doing pretty well, 482,000 sales in 1970, still the #1 comic in America, but it slid to 120,000 by 1979. Batman, for comparison's sake, started the decade lower at about 290,000 copies, eased down to the 150 to 170,000 range by the late 1970s. So it was kind of happening all over the place. Romance comics also suffered during this decade. They burst onto the scene, like I said, in 1947, with Joe Simon and Jack Kirby launching Young Romance for Crestwood Prize, billing it as a grown-up fare for more mature readers, and selling nearly 1 million copies a month at its peak. The pre-Comics Code era was a little bit spicier with the romance comics, titles like My Love Story, Real Love, Love Confessions, My Secret, and Fox's string of My blank books. They would just kind of fill in that blank. But by the late 1940s and early 50s, publishers from DC, who had Girls' Love Stories, Falling in Love, Marvel Atlas, which had My Romance, Love Romances, Charlton, Harvey, Quality, and others, flooded the racks with over 100 titles, making romance a genuine market force. But by 1954, the Comics Code tamed the spicier stories, and in time, women moved on to racier paperback novels and TV soap operas that better matched their evolving tastes. Sales decreased due to oversaturation and these preferences, and publishers followed the money. By the 1970s, the genre had largely faded. As women and girls moved away from these comics, the teen humor genre also suffered. And as a result of these troubles, Archie clones became very few and far between. Harvey was first published in 1970, written and edited by Stan Lee, with art primarily by Stan Goldberg, again showing influences from his Millie the Model work. Book ran for 6 issues and was canceled. Harvey Hooper was a red-headed, good-natured teen who moved from the big city to quiet little Midville High. This was Marvel's most direct attempt in the 1970s to challenge Archie, even using a redheaded everyman lead, but poor old Harvey didn't stand a chance. The series Archie, like trade dress, reportedly raised eyebrows at Archie Publications. Vicky #1 was published in February of 1975 from Atlas Seaboard, ran for just 4 issues in the original 75 Atlas run, with limited additional distribution and reprint activity into the early 1980s. Vicky Young was a perky, fashion-conscious teenage girl navigating high school life with friends and family. The title was basically just a repackaged version of the earlier Tippy Teen series, renamed and slightly edited for the short-lived Atlas Seaboard line. It represented one of the last direct attempts to compete with Archie using reprinted material. Square-bound giant format and swimsuit covers did give it a distinctive look, but it was not enough to keep it alive. Fast Willie Jackson from Fitzgerald Publications debuted in October of '76, created and written by Bertram Fitzgerald, with art by various talents, including uncredited Archie veterans working under pseudonyms. It ran for 7 issues. Willie Jackson was a likable, well-rounded African-American teen in Mo City. He had friends like JoJo, Dee Dee, and Hannibal Jones. The book reflected an urban high school environment rather than Riverdale's small-town environment. Published as part of Fitzgerald's broader Golden Legacy educational line. Now, the 1980s marked a period, again, of consolidation and family stewardship for Archie Comics Publications. With the direct sales comic shop market booming for superheroes, Archie stuck with newsstand distribution and the highly successful digest format. In 82 or 83, the founder's sons, Michael Silberkite, Richard Goldwater, bought the company back from public ownership, returning it to private family control. This move provided stability and long-term focus. Maurice Coyne had already retired as CFO in the 1970s, and the pulp era side business had long since closed. Dan DeCarlo remained the artistic patriarch of the line. Chick Stone and other veterans, along with newer talents, supported the high-volume output. DeCarlo's influence kept the characters looking current without losing that timeless appeal. Digests remained a cornerstone, with Archie Digest, Betty and Veronica Digest, and jumbo editions keeping sales alive. The line was expanded with Betty's Diary in 1986, The New Archies from 87 to 90, a more contemporary take on the gang, Betty and Veronica Volume 2, Number 1 in 1987, and Archie 3000, a futuristic miniseries that came out in 1989. But the 80s was, in general, not kind to Archie Comics. Sales were down to about 60 to 90,000 a month. The magazine went bi-monthly to stretch the run. At DC, Batman had similar troubles, dipping to around 75 to 100,000 mid-decade, before a late spike to about 200,000 in 1987. The only notable addition to the Archie clones in the 1980s was the underground parody title Cherry Pop-Tart, later just Cherry or Cherry Pop-Star, due to complaints from the fine people behind the Pop-Tarts brand. Now, while the character first appeared in Underground Comics in 1971, she got her own solo series in 81, which was published sporadically until 2000. This was an adult, erotic spoof of the Archie formula, and therefore falls outside the wholesome teen humor tradition. It is really noted here only for the sake of completeness, and because it did use that Archie trade dress. So while sales dipped, and they would dip further, Archie Comics did not die, and continues to be published to this day, sometime ranging kind of far from the old wholesome formula and the old house style. We'll end our look at the genre with the end of the Rivals and Clones, but the Archie story continues on. That is my retrospective of the Archie clones running from the 40s to the 80s, a major segment of the comic book genre, along with romance comics, that essentially died off in the 1970s when women just kind of moved on to other issues. And when people talk these days about how comic books are very male-focused, well, that's because boys and men kept buying them, and women moved on to other things. And I don't know, maybe they'll come back someday. We'll see. But hope you enjoyed this retrospective. When I started this, I thought it'd be fun to look at a few comic book titles that sort of aped Archie, looked kind of like it, etc. I had no idea how many comic titles there were, especially in the 40s and 50s. wow, it's really amazing. And I will tell you this, looking through a lot of these, a lot of great art. The artists really delivered on these books. I think it was because they needed to draw women well. Women are difficult to draw, so therefore you had to get really good artists in the first place to draw these things. You should check them out. From the art alone, look, it's the same plots. It's the same jokes. You're not going to get a lot of variation there. But from the art alone, all these books are worth looking at. Let me know what you think in the comments. I would love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this retrospective, please give it a like, maybe subscribe, maybe share with a friend. I cannot believe how long this thing went. And I hope you did enjoy it. But until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun out there. And I will see you hopefully again soon in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.